Welcome to Alienating the Audience. I'm Andrew Heaton, the thinking man's nerd. Mystery Science Theater 3000 is one of my all-time favorite comedy shows and science fiction shows. Today, I have tracked down one of its writers, Jo Pehl, who also played Pearl in several episodes. We're going to talk shop about how to make a hit sci-fi comedy by making fun of B-level sci-fi flicks. Let's go! I am joined today by Miss Jo Pehl, a writer, comedian, actor who I know best through Mystery Science Theater 3000, one of my all-time favorite comedy programs and sci-fi programs. Jo, I am thrilled that you're coming on the program. You are a comedy celebrity and comedy legend. And
am I now? A legend.
No, truly, because so you and I met really randomly, where we were doing an icebreakers at an online get-to-know-you session for a freighting and trucking company through a mutual friend.
Yeah.
And it was, but I didn't know you were going to be there. And I was so thrilled to make contact with you because I feel like what you guys did on Mystery Science Theater 3000 was basically create an entirely new medium of comedy. And so I as far as I'm concerned, anybody that worked on that project is like a permanent knight or dame of the comedic order. And so you're a star.
Wow, Andrew, thank you. Do you prefer Andy or Andrew?
You know what? I actually like to go by Heaton. It makes me feel chummy, like you and I are hanging out in college.
Okay. And, I should have asked you that before we started recording. So this will make for a fascinating podcast.
This is good. This lets all of the audience know how to address me if they ever see me at a grocery store.
Totally. You're welcome. Okay, Heaton.
Yeah. Well, so I feel like by the time Mystery Science Theater came on the air, stand-up comedy was already a well-established medium. Improv was already a well-established medium. Saturday Night Live had been doing sketch comedy for some time, and I feel like what you all did was take heckling and elevate it into an art form. And I'm very curious as to the writing process and just sort of how you approach Mystery Science Theater 3000 in general. But before we get into it, when did you glom onto the cast or into the writer's room?
I got there the first year. It was season 4, but they had 2 seasons on local television in the Twin Cities. Then I think they had their first year with, at the time, Comedy Central. And then I got there, I think my first show was season 4, episode 4 was the first show I wrote on. And it was my sort of audition trial basis.
And how did you get into that? Were they like just kind of hanging out at open mics in Minneapolis, or did you fill in an application, or what?
No, well, I did kind of fill out an application, but I also I knew all those guys coming up through stand-up comedy, like Mike Nelson, Joel, Bridget Jones Nelson, Frank. We all did stand-up together. We were all coming up through the ranks of doing stand-up, and they were just getting this show off the ground. And I did not even have a television. I was so broke. I didn't even have a television. I had no idea what it was. I just knew that some people in my milieu were doing this show. So then, and tell me if I'm going off the rails here. Just bring me back in if you need to.
Sure.
But so then, they had gotten picked up by Comedy Central, and they were looking for a new writer, and Bridget called me, and this is how I picture her whispering into the phone. They're looking for a new writer. Don't say I said anything. Call Mike. So Mike was the head writer, so I called Mike, and I was super shy at that point in my life, and I was like, I heard you're looking for a new writer. Would it be okay if I thought about maybe possibly, it's so Minnesotan too, so that's how.
Because you guys are almost Canadian in terms of your baseline of etiquette and apologizing and being polite.
It is very Canadian. Where are you located?
So I'm from Oklahoma originally, which is the Canada of Texas. But
did not know that.
Yeah, and everybody in Oklahoma hates it when I make that joke, and for some reason, so does everybody in Texas. But we're kind of we're just a quieter version of whatever Texas is. So we don't we don't have the sort of open forward apology that Minnesota and Wisconsin and Canada have.
Yeah, you lead with your apology. So
Yeah.
So then I was there for a couple of weeks on a trial basis, and then it was formalized, and there it is.
Was it easier coming up in comedy in Minnesota? Because, I mean, normally the standard reasoning, like I was in New York for 6 years and I moved out to LA about a week before COVID lockdown, which is why I'm currently in Texas. But normally the advice is like, oh, you got to go to LA or you got to go to New York. And you get there and there's all these amazing things happening, but there's also several thousand people trying to do exactly what you want to do. Whereas Minnesota, less on the map. But I would imagine if you're really funny in Minnesota, you're more noticed by anything happening there.
Well, I don't have anything to compare it to, but I know that I really feel for you, because I know that I was way too chicken to move out to LA or New York. I didn't even know that was a thing you could do. I didn't even know I could make my living doing stand-up. I was so, I come from a very pragmatic family. That's not a thing that you do. And then I was doing a lot of stand-up on the road, and then Mystery Science Theater came up, and it was kind of perfect because it fit my sense of humor. I felt like I fit in. I felt like I worked, because I lost a lot of jobs before then because I was so inept. And so I don't have much to compare it to. I think I was really lucky because I worked hard, and whatever talent I may or may not have, I was still really lucky. I have a lot of really talented friends, So to answer your original question, Heaton, I'm not sure that it was easier or not. It was still very competitive, but it was really a real hotbed of comedy at the time. Like the music scene was really hot then in the 80s too.
Well, and that's also, let me think, Comedy Central started in, 89 or something like that?
Yeah.
I get the impression from, when I was in New York and I was doing stand-up and I was talking to older stand-up comedians that had been a part of the comedy boom, I got the impression that prior to kind of the ascent of Comedy Central, you could make a pretty good living as a stand-up anywhere in the country, because in any city with 1 million people in it had like 5 comedy clubs that were playing every night. And now it's like, it's maybe with a million person city, there might be 1 comedy club. And so that's all declined precipitously because we can all go home and watch stand-up or hop on Spotify or anything like that. But
right. No, it was a huge boom in the Twin Cities. So yeah, I'm just acknowledging that huge creative comedy boom.
And I do think you lucked out because, like, for me, I had to leave, the middle of the country where I had family and new people and, get a little stick and bindle and go to the big city and be sad and miserable and try and make it work.
No.
Whereas you got to keep, like, your background and your past and your roots and all of that stuff while pursuing comedy. That's really tough to do.
Right. And I was tremendously fortunate because I was so chicken. I wouldn't have never ventured out of my little world, and I was still doing comedy on the road, but I got to do comedy in a day job, which was thrilling, and I loved the people I worked with. So I never take that for granted.
And you said a moment ago that Mystery Science Theater 3000, when you started working with it, it comported your sense of humor. So in what capacity did it, like just in terms of being absurd or of being, very, I think, very positive? Like in what ways did you feel that you meshed with it?
I felt like a lot, if not most of the comedy comes from, it's a call and response of sorts, but the responses we gave to the movie, we all drew on our personal experiences, our personal knowledge, our personal interests in things. And we were able to deploy those fascinations, our nerddom, to a specific setup, if you will, the setup being the movie. So I felt like I got to bring my own sensibility to it. I didn't have to try and write a lot of shtick to it. It's all quips. It's all short form humor that relates to the setup of the movie. And I can be kind of structural that way, like that. That is good for me to, like, here's a space, here's a space, here's a space, here's what I can say.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting in that capacity. I've gone on like a comedic nerd rabbit hole several times with Mystery Science Theater 3000, because like I said, I do think that you all pioneered a new comedic medium, which is an impressive thing. So like when you look at stand-up comedy pretty much comes out of like Borscht Belt and vaudeville. It's set up punchline, set up punchline. All stand-up comedy, set up punchline again and again. And if there is like a delay in the punchline, it's going to be a really big payoff. Whereas with what you guys were doing, you're letting the movie do the heavy lifting. It's establishing the setup. And so you can just shoot one sentence. You don't have to have the setup and the punchline. You get to play with it.
Right, exactly. So that's a really great way to put it. And I always wonder how there were times when sometimes, depending on what edit or format it was being played in, a joke would get censored. And I am really fascinated by how you make that choice. If the movie is saying something and then you have a response to it, how can you censor that? Do you see what I'm saying? Because independently, they stand they're discrete entities. So how you have to contextualize it, which seems very subjective to me, and I'm sorry I've gone down the rabbit hole. But
no, you're fine. This is an episode. This is probably going to be 15% science fiction and 85% comedy. But I suspect that massive science fiction fans probably really like Mystery Science Theater 3000. So this is something that I find really interesting about stand-up comedians as well, is that I find that stand-up comedians all have our own metric by which we judge what is offensive. And improv people, by contrast, and I've some of my best friends are on my former improv team in New York, and but I kind of come out of that stand-up world. And so in my experience, when I'm doing stand-up comedy, and I'm really not very edgy, I'm almost Minnesotan. I'm almost. I describe my sense of humor as basically pre Me Too Garrison Keillor. That's kind of my natural bearings. But if in theory somebody were to come up to me after a show and say what you said offended me, I would go, well, what was the essence of the truth that I was communicating through the joke? And were you offended by that, or were you offended by the extent to which I hyperbolized it, or its proximity to something sacred? But for me, it's very much I have objective standards, and I get to determine whether or not they're offensive. Whereas my improv friends tend to have it completely on the other foot, where whether they're offensive or not is dictated by the audience. If the audience is offended, it was offensive, and that's kind of the end of the story. And
wow. Okay. That is fascinating to me, because I'm of the camp. There's a lot of comedy I don't like that does not resonate with me, but I'm always really hesitant to say that I was offended by something, because I don't think anyone owes me caretaking. I don't think anyone owes me the right not to be offended. Everything's going to be bothersome to someone. And I think I err on the side of, I know what it's like to come up in stand-up and performing. I would rather err on the side of letting that person have their voice, and maybe letting the marketplace dictate it. And this is not condoning anything, but it's not up to me to tell them what their creative life should be. Am I making any sense, Heaton?
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Very much so. Yeah.
So I really always hesitate to use that word, that I was offended by something. And if you're offended by stuff, I mean, are you familiar with the arts? Are you familiar with stand-up comedy? Something is always going to be provocative in some way, get you out of your comfort zone.
Mm-hmm. And I think stand-up comedy in particular tends to be a transgressive medium. And I don't mean transgressive in terms of transgender people. I mean the broader, older term of there are norms, and part of the humor is exploring norms and whether or not they're worthwhile, and then also deriving a lot of comedic boost from the tension of exploring those norms.
Yeah, and poking at people. I think that's really interesting. Yes.
Okay, so then with Mystery Science Theater 3000, a couple of questions I have for formulating it. Am I right in thinking that you guys intentionally eschewed being negative when writing scripts for it? Because I was watching, I emailed you prior to this, and I watched The Brain That Wouldn't Die, which is an amazingly horrible film.
Great?
It's so good. Oh, it was so great.
It's so perfect. French kiss.
But one of the things that I noticed when I was watching it was that I think it was Mike that was the host at that time, and he had the two robots, Tom and Crow. But Tom and Crow would rarely criticize the film. They would say things like, "Oh, that's why he's got the lab." Like something really obviously stupid would happen, and they would play along with it as if they were kind of dumb and like, "Oh, I got it." But it was always just very positive in how they approached it. And I thought that kind of makes sense, because I think if it was just them ragging on the film for an hour and a half, it would wind up being exhausting.
Yeah, I think that would wear really thin. I think it really reflected our Midwestern sensibilities for our sensibility to come at things obliquely. And sorry for all my ums. I'm just trying to form a sentence. And the scripts that we ended up recording, they were always much, much darker before that final edit.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we have a lot of, I think a lot of comedians always have that dark side. We wanted to make sure something played. We wanted to send up a lot of the dark themes in these movies, like The Brain That Wouldn't Die, and the typical theme of a guy like killing a woman so he can create another woman.
In that film, in that film, there's a mad scientist who has figured out how to keep independent body parts alive until they can be grafted onto a different one, and he, just because he's driving too fast, ends up killing his girlfriend, severs her head, and then decides he's going to kill some other lady to get her body to graft his girlfriend's head onto. And much of the plot of the film is just him trying to lure women from kind of seedy 1960s level strip clubs. They're like seedy, but you don't see anything. And he's trying to lure them into his house. And it's there's some darkness there.
Right. Which I think plays to the whole idea of overtly or covertly, the whole idea that these women, nobody will miss these women. And maybe I'm examining it too deeply. But one of the things I loved about being on that writing team, that writing staff, was awareness of these things that are being presented that I think you kind of digest and internalize, and you don't even know it. And so I really appreciated a lot of those sensibilities. And so Heaton, the thing I want to clarify, it's been a while since I've seen that movie. So why didn't he just get a whole new girlfriend? You can't tell me he was so in love with her mind.
Yeah.
Right?
I think you're right. There's a really good line from one of the robots in the MST3K version of that, where he's talking to the severed head of his girlfriend, and she's saying, "Let me die," and he goes, "Don't worry, I'll be able to get you a new body soon, and it'll be a beautiful body." And then the robot, our stand-in goes, "Your personality and mind are immaterial."
Yes,
and his attitude the whole time is very much of like, he's just kind of attached to this particular face. You never get the impression, like, the woman's fairly interchangeable for him. It's his woman, so he's going to do it.
Right. So then why is he investing all that time and energy in just keeping the head alive, when I'm sure there are plenty of women out there, plenty of fish in the sea who would go out with him?
Yeah. Well, no, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that you could play with kind of you could play with the outdated themes or the old social mores of these films. Like one of the things that I enjoy, I've been to a couple of the live riff track events, and I believe you're a writer with riff tracks as well.
Yes.
Okay, so I've been to a couple of those where I attended in a movie theater in New York and watched it live streamed, but they would warm up the audience beautifully by taking these old PSAs. And what was so funny about them was it would be like a doctor going, "I love Lucky Strike cigarettes. They're the best cigarettes for your lungs." And you could there was sort of prima facie hilarious that you guys could add another layer on top of it.
Yeah, that is fascinating. I still, my mouth still hangs open at some of that stuff, having become over the years a little more, aware of what the culture does to us and these messages that we get. And I think, just circling back a little bit to what you brought up a few seconds ago, one of the functions that I think the robots served was being able to say darker jokes. And then that way the dynamic could be, at least with Joel and the bots, it could be, you could admonish the robots for saying something dark or off color to sort of mitigate too strong of a taste. I think when Mike became host, we kind of started working away with that. And we always monitored the scripts about what was too dark or too inappropriate, or what a message we were sending that we weren't even aware of. And I think there's been a lot of discussion among myself and my former castmates and writers about jokes we wouldn't do anymore.
Like, can you give an example of the type of thing? Like, would it just be things that are now inappropriate, or just things that in retrospect seemed a little too dark for the program?
I think it's the first one you said that just seemed really inappropriate, or we were playing fast and loose with sensibilities. Speaking for myself, there's a movie, and I can't remember the name of it, but it has Rondo Hatton in it, and Rondo Hatton had a skull disfiguration, a congenital skull disfiguration, which I can't remember the name of it. And we made a lot of jokes about it. And again, just speaking for myself, I'm not sure I would do that again. I realize he was putting himself forth as this sort of character, this sinister character. But if I had to revisit it, I don't think I would capitalize on that.
On physical disabilities, yeah. That makes sense. Like, something that really strikes me about, say, like 90s sitcoms, like I love Frasier. Frasier's one of my all-time favorite programs. I really enjoy it. So this isn't a slight to Frasier. But like there's an episode where one of the characters is talking to Frasier about how he is very nervous about going out on a date with a woman, and they haven't slept together yet. And she's like, "Well, you guys should just get really drunk and hook up." And it's like, and at the time that was really funny. And now I'm like, I don't know that that's a really good thing for sitcoms to be broadcasting. Of if you're not sure about whether or not you should hook up, just binge drink and then assume everything's consensual. I'm like, yeah, I think we can retire that one.
Yeah, isn't that fascinating though? But maybe that's one of the things that we learn from stand-up as we evolve as human beings and as comedians. I don't know. I just I think that's really interesting, because a lot of the sitcoms that I watch now, so much stuff falls flat, knowing what we know now, or our awarenesses now.
Mm-hmm. I also think, just on a very broad comedy level, I think that sadly, so much humor is limited in its lifespan, particularly in stand-up. I think Mystery Science Theater 3000 will live on. I think that the jokes are timeless because it's very much capitalizing on absurdity and a lot of other things. But like when I watched, I'm going blank here. Who is the very funny black comedian that at one point caught on fire? Richard Pryor. That's it. Richard Pryor. He huge guy within stand-up. I had never seen him before, and I was really looking forward to watching his special. And I watched it, and the first 8 minutes were masturbation jokes. And having come through the New York comedy scene, I have heard more crappy masturbation jokes than is permitted by the Geneva Convention.
If I do say so myself.
I don't ever want to hear a bad masturbation joke again. And so I was I was like, this guy's supposed to be a rock star, and he's telling these but then later, like a year later, it occurred to me that might have been, for everybody in the room at that time, in like 1964, that might have been the first time they'd ever heard anybody discuss masturbation in public. Like, they all thought they were individually freaks, and he's blowing the lid on it. And I'm like, okay, so now that means nothing to me. But at the time, that was like a really sensitive topic. And so it was inherently funny. Right.
Yeah. And circling back to the provocation aspect of it. And that's an instance where that comedy is not made for me. It's not my cup of soup. How Midwestern is that? But I would never say I was offended by it, because that is the artist and that is the artist's medium. It's not up to me, but I have strong reactions about that. Not because I think masturbation is gross or filthy. It's just I'm sort of tired of going to that well all the time.
Yeah. No, I'm the same way. I'm not offended by masturbation jokes. I'm offended by the laziness of masturbation jokes. So unless you've got a really funny spin on it, or conversely, if you can play with how obtuse and old the joke is, kind of in a South Park, isn't it ridiculous we're even doing this kind of way, then I'm fine with it.
Bingo.
But if you're just going to do a masturbation joke, I'm like, it better be great, because we've got 30 years of this we're working through.
Right, and I'm always interested in, and I say this as someone who had a lot of stuff in my act coming up, and probably still do, that didn't age well, but I hung on to it, or I didn't play it out with my unique voice, which
a lot of Dan Quayle jokes, a lot of Walter Mondale jokes. I think he's through your neck of the woods. There's a lot of Mondale jokes.
But I am always interested in people who trod the same ground in uninteresting or ununique ways, and if they haven't immersed themselves or become aware of how much something is in the comedic zeitgeist already. And circling back to a little bit, then Heaton, doesn't it make us have to work harder and be smarter about how we write? And I'm lecturing myself. I'm just talking to myself about this, because I know I have a lot of easy jokes in my stand-up that's like, oh yeah, I don't have to do that one. It might work as a placeholder or something. It might serve a function, but yeah, I can figure out something else.
I'm okay with potentially easy jokes. Like, I think there are certain wells that have been tapped but not yet exhausted. Like, as long as you're not doing it in a misogynistic way, I think there's still a lot of humor to be derived from men and women are different. There's still tension there, and there's still observations to be had. But two of the other jokes that I saw very frequently with beginning comedians was, for whatever reason, I guess because like 80% of all comedians when they start out are 23-year-old men. Like it's so like it's heavily slated, and like the two of the recurring jokes that I would always hear with new comedians was there would be some joke where the punchline would be midget. I think because midgets are, there's a kind of inherent novelty. And the word has kind of a ring to it. And then the other thing is there were a lot of jokes that had like punchline daddy issues. And those always struck me as a little bit mean and, again, kind of lazy, of like, I'm going to let this perceived novelty and the transgressive element of bringing it up do the work for me, as opposed to having an interesting observation.
Fascinating. You are super analytical about it, and I love it. And you came up doing stand-up after me, and the thing that I go to is the don't date much, big surprise. That has become a trope that I still see people do. And I think you can visit the same territory and think of a new setup. And maybe that's it. Maybe your framing device needs to be different. But again, that's your exploration process as a comedian or an artist or a performer.
Did you all taxonomize jokes when you were doing? So I know
we don't even know what that word means.
I know this sounds crazy, but I started noticing this when I was at Riff Tracks here a few years ago, and I was like, oh, there are like at the time I thought that there were like 4 specific types of jokes you guys would bounce back and forth between.
You are so funny.
So you're gonna break my heart, Mary Jo, if you say that you guys just like came in, drank a 6-pack, and were just brilliant without any like org charts or anything like that. Because can I tell you some of the jokes that I've identified, or the types of jokes that I identified?
oh, please!
I made a list. Let me
please,
see. This is where I wish I am very analytical.
Please tell me you have a Google spreadsheet. Please tell me you have an Excel spreadsheet.
See, no, this is great. If you guys ever launch another program and you're like, you know what, we've already got plenty of funny people. We need someone that's like possibly on the spectrum, who's like maybe just a touch on the spectrum to like draw out the analysis of what we're doing. But we don't need him to be as funny as us. Then call me, Mary Jo. I will show up with these.
You are very astute.
These Google spreadsheets. Well, so like a lot of the jokes are just continuing the dialogue of the character, where the character says something like in The Brain That Wouldn't Die, before the guy goes out to try and lure women to their death, his assistant's like, "How will you find a body?" And he goes, "There are ways," and he says it in such a creepy way that the bots for the next like 45 seconds, are going, enigmatic ways, and they just keep playing with it. There's a lot of the time people pretend that they're in the scene, like that they're characters that are there, as opposed to sitting in the theater. There's a fair amount of misdirected action where if somebody raises their hand, somebody will yell taxi. And then like I said earlier, I feel like there's a lot of agreeing with the film, making fun of the film through agreement or through positivity, where rather than ridiculing it, they're playing along with the silliness of the film, and I find that to be a very common joke in there.
Which underscores the absurdity. I think that's the function it served, is to underscore the absurdity. And I'm looking forward to your white paper presentation someday. Yes, and I think you alluded to this, and a lot of it is continuing the dialogue as the persona of the actor, of the character. I always enjoyed non sequiturs. I always enjoyed, and I know there's Venn overlap in this, but I always enjoyed something very serious happening on screen that is deflated by a ridiculous assumption about what's going.
Nice. Okay,
on.
I'm writing that down.
Okay.
Serious thing on screen.
Submit your white
deflated by
paper to me for edits.
Okay, that makes sense. So that's like, someone says something really grave, like I'm just off, we have no idea what will happen, but we know we'll all die. And then somebody off to the side goes, guys, we need that burger now, or something like that, where it's implying, previously we assumed that these guys are submarine commanders and that they're about to go fight the Germans, but now the setting is being changed by the MST3K cast, that actually they're in the back room of a diner and they're just being grandiloquent. And
You are really up in your head about this, and I love it. And the one that comes to mind is, I can't remember, Escape to the Bronx, where there's, a dystopian future and stormtroopers are going through these abandoned buildings, and then a building blows up and all the stormtroopers run out of the building, and Trace Ballou says, as Crow says, Gary saw a silverfish. So just something so mundane that contrasts with the bravado of these stormtroopers and what the director hoped would be this visual impact of a building exploding, like passing for drama, and then really undermining it with the most inane thing. And that joke still always makes me laugh because I think Trace is a brilliant comedian and actor, and just his delivery of that line.
That's I'll add that to my white paper. Thank you.
I see you taking notes.
And by the way, I need to tell people listening that this is if they're listening, they're like, Heaton's less funny than usual. The problem is that when I get into comedy analysis mode, I am now approaching my job, and I'm dealing with this as like an engineering equation. So Mary Jo, I promise you, I'm actually really funny when I'm writing stuff.
I believe you. You don't have to like set yourself up, or it's not a job interview. And I love these deep dives because honestly, sometimes I'm not that intellectual or analytical about it. I'm more instinctual, and it's like, sometimes I teach elite writing workshops, comedic writing workshops, and people dive really deep, and I feel really embarrassed because it's like, I don't know how to quantify that. I'm instinctual. I'm instinctual,
You're an intuitive
having
thinker.
been doing it 30 years in some form.
Okay. Well, then, so when you guys were writing this, first of all, how would you select the films? And I'll pitch that to you, and then I've got my next question.
Okay.
Because it's not like there's a comprehensive list of terrible films from the 60s. Is there and my other guess would be like I have found comedically it's very difficult to take an existing comedic work and spoof it. Like it's because it's hard. You need to have that differential of they're taking this thing very seriously and we can capitalize on that.
Earnestness. The earnestness
exactly.
is key. And we, at the time, way back in olden times, we would get boxes of public domain or movies that we could easily acquire the rights to.
Mm-hmm.
Comedy Central would do that, or Comedy Channel. And we get boxes of VHS tapes, and Frank Conniff would it was his he was in charge of doing screeners, so he'd watch a little bit and see if it was appropriate. And then we learned the hard way that you have to watch a movie. You can get a feel for it within the first 10, 15 minutes. We learned the hard way that we had to start watching them all the way through, because I think it's Side Hackers that, this was before my time, Side Hackers, they didn't watch all the way through, and there's a rape scene in it.
Okay.
That there they were sitting on it. It was sitting with it. It's already under schedule and the rights have been acquired, and they had to edit and write around it. And a lot of movies have that darkness. So we learned to watch the whole thing through. And did I answer your question? I went far afield there.
No, because I was just curious. So it sounds like you'd have somebody, if not Frank, somebody would screen these films, watch them and go, yeah, I think this would work for us. And yeah, the earnestness makes sense to me. Like, I've worked on a few projects before where people in the project that don't have a comedic background will go, this reminds me of X comedy. We should parody X comedy. And I'm like, that won't work. Like, it only unless they're doing such a horrible job that it's inherently not funny. But if it's already funny, don't try. It won't.
Right.
It's very difficult to do.
Right. And you have to find your own voice. I mean, I know we're all influenced by influences, but it doesn't, to me, that doesn't work for me. And just going back a little bit, Comedy Central or the Comedy Channel would send us boxes of VHS tapes, and we accessed a lot through Rick Pralinger archives.
Right,
have you heard of them?
Well, yeah, I've used because the Pralinger archives are now online. Like, I sometimes. I've thought about doing something with old PSAs, because I work with a couple of different political media companies in DC and elsewhere, and the old PSAs are amazing. They're great, and they're on the Pralinger archives. Yeah,
yeah, and it was so fascinating, and this was before anything was online, and it just felt like. Oh, it felt like being in a candy store. He had so much stuff, and he'd send us stuff. Yeah, so. Oh,
and I got to say, they're great, because I'm now pretty familiar with the better PSAs in the Pralinger archives. Like, there's one from 1958, I think, or around about that time, called "Our Cities Must Fight," and it's these two guys with mustaches and suits and ties smoking pipes and cigars, and the whole time they're going, did you know that if nuclear weapons fell on this city, many of the people would flee like cowards? And the whole thing is this government propaganda to be like, look, even if your city's nuked, go into your basement, but then come out and start building tanks. And like, you're watching this going, what is happening here? There's some really good stuff on there.
Oh my gosh. If your listeners could see me now, you could see that my mouth is just hanging open.
Yeah.
And sometimes you don't even know what the point of the PSA is, like what side they're trying to convey, which I find quite amusing.
Have you seen And One Got Fat, which I feel like is the greatest PSA of all time?
Shut up. What is it?
Oh my God. Okay. So Mary Jo, I'm going to give you this one piece of advice. Next time you have an acid trip, don't watch And One Got Fat, because it will
Good to know.
Absolutely freak you out.
Because I look like I take a lot of acid.
Yeah, that was my big assumption. Yeah. No, it's like an 18-minute bike ride, like bicycle safety video from like the early 60s. So it's got that kind of Technicolor thing. And it's all these monkeys riding bicycles, and they're all dying in various ways by getting hit by buses or falling down sewer mains. It's really jarring and terrifying.
Are the monkeys played by humans in Monkey Mass? I think Riff Tracks did that.
I would imagine that you guys did at some point. It's phenomenal stuff.
I think it's so interesting. I try to imagine the people behind these projects. And for something like that, I feel like, there's somebody who went to art school who was deeply influenced by Salvador Dali and finally got a job as a PA, worked his way up, and decided this is how his art school, surrealism is going to.
I'm a cynic about it. I think that there was a glut of publicly available money in the 60s and 70s where they're like, hey, if you make a PSA, we'll give you money. And a bunch of like entrepreneurs went, oh, okay. Like, how much does a recorder cost? Yeah, okay, like $1,000. We could probably pocket $3,000. All right, get some monkey masks and some bikes.
Oh, sure, but how do you pitch the monkey mask idea? That's what I'm
true.
saying. Like,
yeah, that's a good point.
What was your vision that
Yeah.
And how do you tie that together? What is the gun on the mantle of the monkey mask? How does that pay off?
Okay, well, so having selected the films for MST3K, I'm now imagining that we're all, as a bunch of writers, we're sitting in the theater or the living room or wherever you guys watched. I'm assuming you had a private theater, and you're sitting in the theater. Now, if I'm joining you, I'm going to either drink a pot of coffee or score an Adderall, and I've got my color-coordinated jokes that I already told you about, where I'm going, this seems like code yellow. We're going to continue the dialogue. That's code green, or whatever. So that's how I'm approaching it. Is that what you guys did, or did you just like riff through it 3 or 4 times and write down what was funny? How did you approach it?
Yeah, we had a big giant screen TV. It was in the writing room, which was just a big room with baffling and carpeting. We had really comfortable giant leather couches.
Nice.
And we would take turns writing on the computer, like writing the script on the computer, which was one of those old box Macs, one of the original Macs. I remember
like
it
blue
so
screen,
clearly.
white text, that kind of thing.
I can't remember how the screen looked, but it was those gray box Macs, the first Macs. And we would take turns writing the script. And how we wrote the script was somebody held the remote and let the movie play for a few seconds, and people would just call out jokes. And so the transcriptionist had to try and catch all the jokes because we didn't know what we were going to use. So you have this massive raw script at first. And then we would do 2 run-throughs. One day we'd do a run-through, then we'd write the host segments, and then we'd do another run-through. Then the script was divided among Paul, myself, maybe just Paul and me, because Frank was watching screeners. And then we would edit the script to the appropriate lines or the lines we thought worked best or would fit in the space. And then we'd watch it again with that draft of the script. And then we'd watch it again to hone. So I guess come up with a final shooting script. So and then we do corrections. So we watched it 8 or 9 times.
Oh, by the end, did you hate it? Like if
a lot of them, yes.
Oh my
gosh,
those films don't hold up 9 times. They maybe hold up twice, like once in 1960, once now.
Oh yeah. It got intense sometimes.
Okay, so all right, this is great to know. So the writing process was just out loud brainstorming and wisecracking, and then you had somebody play scribe, and you do it a couple of times, and then just compile the best jokes.
Yep, we take thank you for the succinct version of that.
No,
that's exactly what
truly,
it boils down to.
That was the main thing I wanted to ask you today. As I was genuinely curious, because it is sublimely funny. It's really, really funny stuff, and I was curious as to if it was like a broad inductive process, or if it was like something where you guys had charts and team inductive.
Totally freestyle, and I feel so lucky that I got to have the funnest job in the world because I have never laughed that hard. I mean, the people I worked with, so funny. How excellent is that I got to be in the midst of that for 7 years as my day job.
And then I'm thinking like, you're watching the 7th iteration of Manos Hands of Fate or something like that. And you're like, oh, this is horrible. And then you're like, but I am getting paid to make jokes with my buddies in these overstuffed couches watching a film at air conditioning.
Totally. And there's free Diet Coke in the fridge. So no, and I think Manos was one, and there were a couple of others that I remember the second day of writing or even going through the first draft where we would be so drained and so sad. Whatever it was, Manos is really weird and life-sucking, but there were a couple that were I remember us just quitting early because we couldn't take it anymore.
So somebody just stood up and went, I'm full. I can't do any more of this.
Yeah,
I have to go on a walk.
I remember one, and I can't remember the movie, but I remember the day where it was mid-afternoon, and we were just sitting there, and Mike would start and stop the movie. Nobody was saying anything, and he finally just turned off the TV, and he said, why don't we call it a day? And we all just sort of slumped out of the writing room.
I'm going to go read Anna Karenina. I need something. I need something
To cheer
substantive
myself
here.
up.
Yeah, this has been too horrible. Well, just a couple more questions for you. Are there any tropes you picked up in sci-fi when you were watching all of these films? Were there conventions that were just routinely used despite being good or not?
Oh, totally. The seemingly innocent small creature becoming oversized and gigantic and rampagey, like the giant grasshopper one. End of the Beginning, I think that one is. The other one is attaching body parts that become autonomous and have a life of their own, or attaching a head to a body, sort of rebuilding or electrifying bodies so that they can reanimate. Things from outer space, landing in a person's universe that they don't know what it is and wreaks havoc. Those are just a few, but I'd be interested to know if you can refer to your white paper, like what other things you've observed.
The only one that leaps out to me is that I feel like there's a lot of old science fiction films that have this bizarre, like it's not even clever. It's just there's a monster, right? He's coming out of the swamp, and we can't stop the swamp monster. He's impervious to bullets, and he's grabbing picnickers and dragging them into the swamp. And we don't know how. Oh no! And he's going to eat everybody. And then about 4/5 of the way through the film, some guy in a lab coat goes, "I've got it, sodium," and he'll just list an element. And then everybody's like, oh, thank God, he scienced it. It's like they wrote a script and some guy just wrote in insert science, and they write in the most boilerplate, like not even like Star Trek level, like, oh, it was a tachyon surge. It just like, yeah, no problem. It was a combination of sunlight and salt, and that did it. And I always look at that and go, this is such for all of the buildup, this is such an odd way to kill the monster, of just sort of mathematical proceduralism.
Okay, that is so hilarious. Your breakdown of it and your observation, and also the to paraphrase you, all the special effects did all the heavy lifting, and then they had to back into we got to have a resolution. I don't know, should we make it baking powder? That yeah, that sounds good. And that makes me always think of the girlfriend who supports him unfailingly, because it's always a man, the girlfriend that supports him unfailingly, and then becomes the object of the monster or whatever. So the stakes are high there. She doesn't have a career of her own. She doesn't. Oh, and they're always going to get married. They're always just about to get married.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes sense. That's a weird 50s thing. I really like. It's not science fiction, obviously, but the Jimmy Stewart film where the angel visits him. It's a Wonderful Life. And he goes, he sees the alternate universe where he didn't exist, and he's like, Clarence, show me my wife. And he's like, no, you don't want to see her. You don't want to see her. And he's like, no, take me to her. And then there's like, dun dun dun, and she's just an unwed lady. She's just a librarian, and like, there's nothing wrong with her. She's not in pain, but he's like, oh no, I can't believe this horrible universe in which she's an old maid, and but like in 1940s, that's like truly terrifying. Whereas now it's like, that's fine.
Movie.
Yeah.
A horror movie of the 1940s, and it's been a while since I've seen that, and I had lost sight of that component of it, and that's awful and hilarious. Like, oh my God, were it not for me to come along and save her from, oh my gosh, a fate worse than death.
Yeah, she's just a little dowdy and single. That's it. Those are the only...
Doing her thing.
Yeah.
Living her life. Dowdy and single. Yeah. What's the harm in that?
So, Mary Jo, I have loved talking to you. Thank you so much for coming on the program and availing your experiences and your insights on comedy. Thank you so much.
It's been a delight, Heaton. And I have to ask you, where in Texas are you now?
I am presently I am at a studio that used to be a nudist colony in Austin, Texas. I'm only here for a week, and then I'm going back to LA to figure out what I do with my stuff. And then after that, I don't know where I'm
Only
going.
at the nudist colony for a week. No, I spent 10 years in Austin.
Oh, really?
Yeah, where's your studio?
It's out on the so it's my friend's studio, but it's out on the west side. Kind of, do you know where the Austin Zoo is?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So it's like maybe 3 minutes from there. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I miss Austin. I have a lot of I get a little teary thinking about Austin. I had a great adventure there.
Okay.
And
It's super fun. Here, I view Austin like have you ever dated anybody that like you kind of wished you married, but you knew it wouldn't have worked out, but you're like kind of wistful for that what might have been? That's how I feel about Austin, because it's so hot. And I my whole professional goal in life is to become successful enough that I never sweat ever. That just
a man after my own heart.
At the gym and during frenzied lovemaking, those are the only times I break a sweat. And the rest of the time, I am wearing like tweed suits, wandering around outside with no sweat at all. And Austin is super hot, like through October. So yeah.
Hey, dude, I know. I lived there. I would challenge you and say even all through the year, I felt like even in December, when the overnight low would be like 84, it's fascinating. Sometimes it gets really hot here in Minnesota, and the high will be what the overnight low would have been in Austin. But I'll tell you what, I did not even know that much about hill country. And it's so beautiful. And I loved those small towns outlying the Austin area. And I wax nostalgic, and I just miss it. And I have a lot of people there. If you're there, they're not doing it anymore. Did you ever see Master Pancake Theater?
I've heard of it. In fact, I think I know a couple of the people that did it or do it. I feel like it still happens on occasion, although probably not right now.
They're doing it online now, but I don't know if this. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Is that John? There's kind of the dean of humorists in Austin.
John Erler?
Maybe that's it. He wrote the name escapes me at the moment, but he's a funny novelist, and I feel like he's kind of got a hand in everything. He has a program called 2-Page Symposium, where he invites authors to come and read the first 2 pages.
Edgerton.
That's it. Owen Edgerton. Yeah, I feel like he's got whenever there's a creative project involving funny people, he's somewhere like in the wings or on stage.
Owen is everywhere.
Yeah.
Owen, if you're listening to this, we know where you are.
Yeah, I'll try and nab him at some point, because I'm an Owen fan. I'll say that like the things that I really love about Austin, I think what Austin tends to broadcast, which is true, is Austin likes to like very much own and project its quirk. It is a quirk-based economy. It's one of maybe 3 cities in the country that have a quirk-based economy.
You're so eloquent. I love the way you say things.
You roll into Austin and they're like, "Welcome to Austin. Here's your ukulele. Are you going to the turtle race?" Like it's a very they love that kind of stuff. But really, the staying power to it that I like about it and I genuinely miss is I don't think people in Austin realize how highly they value community here. Like it is I found as an adult, the older I get, it's not hard for me to make one-on-one friends. It's hard for me to make groups of friends. That takes a while. It involves lots of time of getting to know each other. It involves a lot of doing nothing. And as an adult, you don't have a lot of time to do nothing. And in Austin, there's a whole lot of people that really value nope, every Friday I go to this particular bar and I'm friends with everybody there, and I know the bartender and they know my name, and if I don't show up, they call me. Or no, every Thursday we go play pickleball or some other, or we go to the turtle races, but we do it, every Thursday with people. And I was only here for 6 months, but I made some really tight friends and jumped into some groups of friends very quickly. It was very painful to leave.
Yeah, that is really cool. Yeah, we were there. I moved there in 2007 to be with my the would-be husband, and just getting in the groove, and then going to Master Pancake and realizing that they were doing an MST thing live before any of us were doing it live, and becoming friends with those guys. And they are, what I loved about them is they are so funny and they're so quick-witted, and they really pulled me out of my comfort zone because they were willing to jump into anything. I mean, they're on stage in their underwear at a moment's notice. I think, and just falling into that groove. And they actually, when they started doing it, it was called Mr. Sinus theater. And then Jim Mallon, who is a co-producer of Mystery Science Theater, sent them a cease and desist. So I think it's really interesting that I would circle back in my life to them.
Did you just swagger in there with like the biggest ego, knowing that they'd been swatted down from your project?
Oh, no, not at all. Because Jim Mallon is a whole different story. And no, not at all. I just thoroughly enjoyed myself. And it's really fun. Getting back to the way this conversation started, it's really fun to see how what you did inspires other people. And so many people have said, and I'm sorry, I'm going to drag this on. Forgive me. You can cut this all out.
Oh, no, you're good. I felt like I was taking, like I said, I told you 30 to 40 minutes, so I feel like I'm stealing your time. But if you're okay, no, this is great.
Not at all. I feel like I'm blathering. But for a long time, people would say how much Mystery Science Theater influenced them and how funny they thought it was. And for a long time, I didn't really take it in because, I don't know, I didn't want to be egotistical, or I didn't really have that sense of it. And then you go through your life and you realize how much you are influenced by things. And then people would say that to me. And it's really lovely, since I had a job that I loved with people that I loved and for which I will be forever grateful. So that, I don't know, am I making any sense? So the
Sure.
idea that would mean something to people in a world where we need stuff to mean stuff to us. And I'm dancing around it, and it's very convoluted because I don't want to sound egotistical. It doesn't come from a place of egotism at all.
It's against the law in Minnesota. You would be prosecuted.
You know it.
Yeah.
It's the slippery slope to self-esteem. So it just became, anyway, that, please cut this. But when I met Master Pancake and got to work with those guys, it was just really powerful, especially since I learned from them. Since they influenced me with their intense commitment to gags and jokes. And I love John Erler, Joe Parsons, Owen, Scott Chester, Martha Kelly, from Baskets. She joins up occasionally. So there, I'm shutting up now.
Well, actually, I want to lob a final question at you then. Because I was in New York for 6 years. I moved to LA again a month before lockdown. That is not as much fun. And right now during COVID, I'm going, okay, does it make any sense for me to be in a big city? Like particularly if this flares up again over the next year and a half, I don't know that I want to be in an urban isolation chamber that's incredibly expensive. It might be better for me to be in a camper or to go to like a mid-sized city, like to head back to Oklahoma or to head back to Austin or something like that. And I'm sure that there are lots of people that listen to the show who are very creative and very talented, but they're not in one of the 2 or 3 major, they're not in Chicago, New York, or LA, and so they're not connected to that. So like I'm interested for somebody in Minnesota, or you lived in Austin, like what would you suggest in terms of building your own thing in a city that doesn't already have that massive apparatus available to you, as opposed to going to a city and joining somebody else's thing?
Oh, I don't know. I needed like a lot of lead time for that kind of question, Heaton. I told you that.
Right.
I think it's a whole different era where you can do your thing. There are so many outlets to do your thing. When I was coming up, you either got on VH1 Stand-Up Spotlight or you didn't. And we didn't have the means to make our own blog or tweet or Facebook, make our own videos. So I don't know that I have a good answer for that question. I know that when I moved to Austin, I really checked out a lot of arts organizations,
right,
like the Texas Book Council, or I forget the name of it, because I really wanted to connect on that level. And I feel like every city has large organizations, smaller organizations. And now, there are meetup groups. Mm-hmm. So you can really connect in so many ways. Am I getting to the heart of your question?
Absolutely. No, I think the meetup groups are a really good idea. I've thought about, I think for the next phase of my life, when COVID winds down, because it's difficult to do it right now, I would really like to, my 20s and early 30s were so focused on novelty. And now that I'm in my mid 30s, I'm craving community. Like I really want to provide people, I'm going to tear up. I really want to provide people with a place they belong. I think that we're living in this very alienated world right now. Everybody's lonely. and particularly right now where we're isolated. So I want to try and build stuff, and I don't really know how to do it, but I'm learning, and I'm taking notes. Like there's a great place. I don't think it would have been here when you were here, but there's a great place called the Wizard Academy here in Austin that has are you familiar with it? And they've got this wonderful saloon that's basically like Cheers in Hill Country. And one of the things I really enjoy about it is, in addition to the fact that everybody's super nice, like I was gone for 6 months, and I came in after a 6-month interlude, and the bartender heard my voice from the back of the room and was like, "Is that Heaton?" And I was like, "Oh my God, this is amazing." And what they do at some point over the evening, like every Friday when they meet, they'll go, "Okay, anybody who's new here, we're going to go around and we all cheers this person and say, Tom, you glorious bastard." And they all do that. But it's like, but once you go through that, you feel like you've been inducted into something. You're not just at a bar, you're at a group of friends. And I'm like, that's a really worthwhile thing. And I'm trying to think of like wherever I wind up, I'd like to, like, two things that I'd love to do is I'd love to have some kind of humor reading. I think here in Austin, I think Owen Edgerton's got that covered, but I don't know that exists everywhere. And then,
well, I don't want to interrupt you, but I think there can always be versions of it. And I don't know if his I forget what it's called, but it's a two-page
salon. That's it.
Yeah. Salon, yeah, which I love, and I think it's for a literary outlet that may or may not be humorous, which, not to detract from my friend Owen, but yes. But
yeah, I think he does both.
So many ways to do things, and I really love that sentiment. And to me, it points to I always thought when you come up doing stand-up, forgive me for interrupting you.
Go ahead.
It's so isolated. Because you're in a silo. Yeah. You are doing your material. And you're watching
very much
else.
up there by yourself. You sink
and
or swim on your own.
You're watching everybody else's material, and they're guarding their material. And then to move to Austin, and I lived in New York for a while. I've spent a lot of time in LA, but I was in Austin cold. And to meet the Master Pancake folks, for starters, and to realize how important that collaboration was to me, and to have that community, I'm just really, really supporting you, and I'm really touched by that, like how much we need that.
Thank you. And I'll say for people listening, like, I think that improv teams are the bowling leagues of the 21st century. I think like that's like, it's now very normal to be like 43 with kids and just be on an improv team. And that's great because they're a lot of fun. Yes. Even though I was kind of, I was saying I came from a stand-up background. I have a lot of fun doing it, and it provides you with a regular group of people that you hang out with every week and you goof around with, and you also are using a part of your brain you typically don't use as an adult, where you're pretending to be a beaver and you're doing make-believe. So that's a lot of fun.
And you have to be in the moment. You have to be so in the moment.
Yeah, and it teaches you. I have become a better conversationalist as a result, because I used to have this sort of terrier mindset where once I was fixated on something, like I had something that I wanted to say and the other person starts talking, I've got to drag it back to that thing I wanted to talk about. And I'm not perfect, but I'm a lot better now at going, you know what, I can let that go. It's not important. The conversation's moved on. Improv's good for that.
And it's very selfless. If you're doing it right, it's selfless because you can let somebody else, get where they need to go. You can give and you can receive the outcome.
And I'll finish up. The other thing that I would love to do is my favorite place in New York when I lived there was called Marie's Crisis. I don't suppose you've ever been there, Mary Jo? Marie's Crisis is a Broadway show tunes piano bar where everybody in the bar sings show tunes. So if you are within 8 feet of the piano and you're talking, people will glare at you because you're supposed to be singing Hello, Dolly. We're all singing Hello, Dolly. I loved it. There's nowhere in the world I've ever been like that. And I've thought about, okay, how would I recreate that in another city? I think I would have to, I'd just slowly take tabs of everybody I met that liked musicals, and then I'd be like, hey, like if we all chip in $5, we could hire a pianist and we could do this once a month. And I think that'd be a really fun thing. So wherever I wind up, hopefully.
I think that sounds super fun. I think that's a great idea. I want to circle back to Wizard Academy. Yeah. You don't know Monica Ballard by any chance, do you?
I might have met her, but the name doesn't ring a bell immediately.
She does ghost tours throughout Austin, especially that downtown area, which is so great. And she is deeply involved with Wizard Academy, and
they're good people.
Just curious, yeah.
Roy and that whole lot, and like now the guys that run. There's like the saloon. There's Whiskey Tribe. Those guys are awesome. Like I really like everybody that I've met through there. They're great. And even when I was in LA, I'm going to start tearing up again, Mary Jo. When I was in LA on lockdown, they would sometimes call me to do their remote happy hours because they just like I hadn't talked to anybody in like 3 months, and they were like, "We should call up Heaton." They're fantastic people.
I love how open you are to that. Where I'm kind of a hermit, and while I love being out and with certain people, I can get very hermit-y. And so for people to call me up and include me in something would make me really panicky. So I applaud you.
Oh, I am basically a Labrador Retriever in cowboy boots. Like I am, I am very, very gregarious and people oriented. And so particularly when I was in LA, I was like, no, let's do Zoom. Anyway, I will let you go, Mary Jo. Before I do, are there any projects you're working on or things you'd like to point people to? You mentioned that you sometimes teach classes and things like that. Is there anything worth directing folks to?
Yeah, I haven't done that for a while because it's here at an organization in Minneapolis, and I don't want to do it over Zoom, and obviously it's closed. Bridget Nelson and I do our own line of riff tracks, which are a blast, if I do say so myself. I'm working on a memoir about my mom. Look for it in sometime 2028 because it's taking me so long.
I'm going to mark my calendar.
Yes, thanks, Heaton. That would be great.
If George R.R. Martin finishes his book before you do, you really need to think about what you're doing with your life.
Oh my gosh. So that's the long and the short of it.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, Mary Jo.
That's the show. Thanks for listening. Thank you, Mary Jo Pehl, for gracing the podcast with your presence. Until next time, tally-ho!